Greetings, it's I, Titus now, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire Pension. Once more to the world of darkness. Yes, we're diving back into, well, an interesting place that I haven't been in a while. So if you've been someone that watched stuff on my channel, or is a newer person, I did many years ago a lot of old Vampire the Masquerade, Bloodlines, and clan videos. And many of them hold up pretty decently, at least are very informative, and give at least a lot of basic information, even though some of it has been updated for 5th edition. But I didn't always think about if I was going to revisit like a big video years down the lane. That's where this unique video comes in, because there is a new major clan in 5th edition. And I have my complaints about 5th edition, as many of you have also probably heard over the at least the last couple of years. But I do like a lot of stuff from it, and this is actually one that I think is an interesting concept. Heck, that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be diving into the Clan of Death. Yes! And it'll be very interesting to dive into. So, why don't we kind of begin chatting about Hecata, and I can kind of explain more about my feelings and stuff as we're kind of informing on them. Certainly. We can chat. Let's start with the normal thing that I usually start with. Books that you should check out. Make a little bit bigger. So, if you're looking into 5th edition and books that will talk to you about Hecata, the Cultists of the Blood Gods is your first and foremost stop. I'm going to mention a whole bunch of other books, but this is the one that introduces the Hecata and kind of talks about it best. So I would definitely recommend looking into this one. Children of the Blood is another good one. And then some other books that I would recommend kind of diving into are Trails of Ash and Bone, Chicago by Night. Of course, the core rulebook of 5th edition and the Camarilla book do have some information on Hecata. And that's where a lot of the information we're going to be going over comes into a combination of all these places. So, I'm going to begin my big preface of everything. I talked about it in my intro a little bit, but this is something that is a new vampire clan. And that's why it's very unique. And yeah, I talk and bring in 5th edition lore when I talk about a lot of vampire stuff nowadays. But something as major as a new clan is very interesting, and I take it that they've introduced Hecata in a very interesting way. It's basically a necromancy clan. And it does clean up the mess of bloodlines and side groups that are all necromancy related a little bit. It's not necessarily a bad thing to kind of clean up the mess, which is the clans and bloodlines in a way. And because it does it in a very interesting manner, I'm very supportive. You know, they have good reasoning and organic reasoning and stuff behind it. So, we'll do like a little bit of an older, simple version of it there. I like this one. It's an old version. So, sorry about that. So good. The thing about a Hecata is they are not an organic clan like a lot of other clans, or an uninterrupted bloodline. Clans and bloodlines are usually defined as, for a clan, they're coming from a single antediluvian. An uninterrupted bloodline is something caused a schism from a clan or a group and allowed it to develop into its own separate group. Things like for the Samedi, Baron Samedi created his offshoot. You know, so it's sort of like, that's the kind of idea you kind of think about, is that this is very unique. It isn't one of these original. It's made up of the Giovanni, what was left of them, what was left of the Cappadocians, because there still were some other ones, and some of their other relatives of both of these groups, basically bloodlines that were connected to them, and some Nagaraja, which is very interesting, because Nagaraja are looked at so badly. Not all the Nagaraja. That's an important connection. We'll talk about that, but... And Nagaraja don't have their... And a lot of these other bloodlines have less connections with antediluvians. And so, this new, mostly unified clan of death, who all practice necromancy through the use of a new discipline, Oblivion, becomes that. It's basically kind of thinking things a lot like the Giovanni way of thinking things. It thinks of all of those that are part of this necromantic group as a big, extended family. Giovanni were always very family-based in their mentality. That's why the Giovanni as a clan felt very mobbish at times. Certainly they had that. So, we now have the other major independent clans, the Bana Hakim joining the Camarilla, Ministry joining the Anarchs. The Hecata are basically, in contemporary V5, the last significant independent clan. And honestly, again, this is part of the entire thing. I enjoy this portion of the story. Let's talk about the history of this, because this is going to actually be pretty brief, because I'm going to tell you, the majority of the history is the history of the various clans and bloodlines which build up Hecata. If you want to learn or see about those, I recommend checking out, well, I did a crap ton of videos on this back in the day. You can learn about the Cappadocians, the Giovanni, a lot of these other groups that kind of end up in here with those videos. Most of them are pretty good. Some of them probably could use a little work. Again, mixed bag on that. But a lot of the information that they do provide is great. Oh, and I do like to say it, I do usually use a combination of those books and research and the White Wolf Wikipedia. For me personally, at this point in time, since I do not have all those 5th edition books, I rely more on the White Wolf Wikipedia, but I did check the 5th edition books that I do own. I don't have, and I will be very important on this one, the big book that I mentioned in there, Cults of the Blood Gods. So, there are probably a lot more details to this that if you want to go dive in, do research on your own, I would recommend that place to start. That's just my preference. I do want to add this in. So, what is the history of Hecata? Hecata. It's very brief. And it is kind of a combination of a number of different factors. One of the major factors that they do put here is one that I'm a little less agreeant on, because I've said my piece over the years about the Second Inquisition, but it is the Second Inquisition. Not that it isn't something that could be occurring and could be very dangerous. I just usually I say I feel like 5th edition blew its ability to be a threat out of the water to a degree which is, even as something that's supposed to be more realistic, because there is a realism to the threat that exists, it is unrealistic. The vampires should be the unrealistic stuff, not the human stuff. As this is a little bit more thing. So, that was one of the first things that drove it. There was a toll on Clan Giovanni in North America. That's basically where the Second Inquisition fomented from. So they had to regroup back in Italy. And the other factor was something that I've talked a little bit about in things like the Cappadocians and Giovanni things, the promise of 1528, which was supposed to be coming to an end after that 500-year time period. Now, just to dive into it, if you are unfamiliar, it was a treaty between the Camarilla and Giovanni, and it made the Giovanni successors to the Cappadocians in considering the hierarchies of clans. That's basically the way it functioned. It's sort of like the Giovanni were created by murdering the Cappadocians and diablerizing them. So, it basically was a way to end the entire problem that was going over there. And certainly, it was a way of almost forgiving Augustus Giovanni for diablerizing Cappadocius. It's a weird thing. But the big idea about it it was a non-interference between the Giovanni and the Camarilla into each other's affairs. Giovanni had authority over Venice, and the Inner Circle could claim to have their meetings there. So it's this idea that the Camarilla, the Giovanni, can kind of keep to each other's self, out of each other's. The things that's going on, the slaughter of the Cappadocians doesn't involve the Camarilla. Yeah. And considering the origins of the Giovanni, the end of the promise is a pretty big thing in your mind, because that means something played in my brain. Sorry. The protection of the promise is ending. And again, like, the promise was supposed to be 500 years, so presuming it ended 2028. There really wasn't a confirmation on this, but it did, with the mass destruction of a number of Giovanni individuals and some other things that had happened, because there were some big events that happened, the disappearance of Augustus Giovanni. The assault by the Harbingers of Skulls on the clans holding in Venice, which was assisted by some younger members of Giovanni. These two factors basically kind of led to this Giovanni wanting to bring stuff to the table. And there was also the Sixth Grade Maelstrom going on. Effectively, the Giovanni called for a conference, which became known as, I'm showing the image of it here, the Family Reunion. The Harbingers of Skulls agreed. Effectively, the Harbingers of Skulls, who were remnants of the Cappadocians, wanting their revenge, got some. But the thing is, Harbingers of Skulls have already kind of had devastating things happen to them. So it's this combination of these factors that the Harbingers agreed to show up, but others did too. And that's the big thing. The Psameti, any remaining Cappadocians, because not all Harbingers of Skulls were Cappadocians. Those were technically kind of split apart. The Lamia, and there was some Nagaraja seeking refugee from what they called a form of catastrophe, which was technically the Sixth Great Maelstrom that they referred to. And there was a negotiation between these groups that ended with a basically end to hostilities between all of them. It's this kind of idea that a lot of the smaller bloodlines, they don't have a lot of power. The Harbingers, the remaining Cappadocians, the Giovanni, as the three main power sources of necromancy, they all recognize that to continue battling each other with the external threats and things that are going on would not be prudent. The Giovanni, who probably would have been the biggest holdout, losing Augustus Giovanni, losing their, a bunch of their holdings in Venice and having them devastated, put them in a position where they're like, we can't keep battling it out like this. And so, yeah. Negotiations and Clan Hecata was born. After the formation of it, there was some worry that existed, of course, because it's a new clan of death. It's a new organization that, honestly, builds off of the remaining power bases of a lot of smaller groups to something a lot more powerful. That's the thing about Hecata. It is powerful in comparison to what it is. I can't say it's the single most powerful individual clan, but in a way it is, because it is still an independent clan. A lot of other clans, maybe if you remove them from their groupings, would be very powerful on their own, might hold up to it, but they oftentimes rely on having connections with others. They are fairly powerful because of this. The Camarilla had worry because of, their connections with the promise of 1528, and they felt like they would lose some control over the deals and stuff. And the idea also that this group breaking apart, falling, being basically reduced in power. All the various groups, Giovanni, Cappadocians, founder of Harbinger Skulls, Sveti, Lamia, all of these groups, having them have no power was honestly in the mindset of a lot of groups. It was better for them to keep down and out of the way as a threat. Guess what? They're large, they're in charge of necromancy, and they're a threat if they want to be. That's the Hecata. I will get their name correct one of these days. One of them. So, let's talk a little bit about this because we do have some 5th edition stats. Again, I said no piece about the statistics and stuff like this, but we can talk about it. So their banes, their problems is they have a painful kiss. It's basically a change in blood almost. Because not only did this deal cement them as one group, it actually changed them. Their connections between necromancy and each other, and having kind of like some joint connections in blood, meant that the agreement, the deal, actually had an effect supernaturally. Many Hecata no longer have their old curses. The Semeti are no longer rotting corpses. The Nagaraja no longer require the substance of flesh. The Cappadocians, Harbinger Skulls, no longer have the corpse-like complexions. Instead, they have now one bane, one problem, an excruciating painful kiss. There is a variant, though, decay. Some Hecata are kind of radioactive, in a sense. It's not like actual radiation, like gamma radiation, but pure entropy. Things around them decay gradually, but at a noticeable place. Their havens, personal resources, retainers. So, it's a kind of tax that they can have. And they sometimes have a compulsion, morbidity, morbid curiosity. They basically are urged by their blood to sting individuals around them for signs of illness, frailty, impending death. Until they've predicted a death or solved a case of a local one, they get penalties to dice rolls, which is just weird. Again, it's 5th edition stuff, which if you like 5th edition, I'm not against it. I just don't. It's to each their own, and, the way I tell stories in Vampire the Masquerade doesn't work as well within 5th edition. 5th edition hampers my storytelling version and my idea of storytelling in Vampire. And, again, there are stories that you can tell. Just my So there are 10 main bloodlines, and this doesn't mean that they couldn't introduce more bloodlines as they go. And so I'm going to try to talk about each of these and represent them with images here, because they do actually have some on them. Oh. Well, also noting, they have a kind of double leadership kind of thing, a de jure and de facto. The group's leadership is the Anasazi Council. They're elders and de facto leaders of Clan Hecata. They are kind of left over from the Giovanni. Originally, that's what they were. They were the group that looked after Giovanni's affairs, Augustus Giovanni, when he wasn't awake or doing stuff, or wasn't in Topor, or was in Topor and not awake. So they've kind of taken the reins as the de jure authority in Clan Hecata. And foremost members of the elite group are known as the 1444 Chamber, which is composed of Capuchin and the late Augustus' most trusted advisors. And so Capuchin himself is kind of this de facto leader of Hecata. So keep that in mind. And that's talking about Capuchin. And his entire thing would be a story unto itself. Because he's a very strange and enigmatic individual. Anyway, back to our bloodlines. We have La Familia Giovanni, or the Clan Giovanni, as part of one of the bloodlines. It's still largely in the leadership role, of course, as I talk about it, even without Augustus Giovanni as its influence. They don't normally identify themselves outside the two outsiders as Hecata. They have some satellite families, such as Della Passagilis and Gilbertus, who don't have their individual bloodline status within Hecata. And it is also noting that some of these bloodlines, beyond the original disciplines, Auspex, Fortitude, Oblivion, have individual optional discipline spreads. So keep that in mind too. Some of these, they all have Oblivion, but they also would have optional discipline spreads. Wow, English failed me for just a minute in my brain. So this is like, again, this is our remnants of Giovanni that are part of the group here. They don't really talk about who they are. I mean, like, I guess they still have a little bit of Giovanni identity within them. You're not necessarily getting rid of that, but they're there. Oh, and an important note, and this is just a note. The Beckoning, which I've talked about in some other videos, which I'll mention again. I'll just explain here for a second. Giovanni and Hecata are linked to the Beckoning, which has compelled a lot of elders to the Middle East for reasons in 5th edition storyline. Knows why this group isn't affected by that the same way. But it also means Hecata have a lot of their elders still left. Keep that in mind. So, let's talk about the Harbingers of Ashur, who are the remains of Clan Cappadocians, both the main line and the Harbingers of Skulls. So, with the family reunion, those two sides of the Cappadocians basically came back together. They took the name Ashur, who is thought to have been a version of a Cappadocius himself, as a mark of their fealty to the original origin of the entire group's blood. Because honestly speaking, the Cappadocians are one of the main possible originations in Cappadocius for all of the necromantic bloodlines. So, they are a kind of combination of those two things. And that's the thing is, the Harbingers of Ashur are the essence of what had become of them, the Harbingers of Skull, and what they were before Cappadocians combined. There are still those that strictly look at themselves as Cappadocians, but they're no longer fugitives. They no longer have like as much anger and stuff like that, so they've reconnected, and there's in better situation. Let's keep going. Let's talk about the descendants of the Baron, of course. And I'm going to butcher this like the Nasan San An, the Nation of Blood, as it's also called, the new face of the Semeti. So this is what's left over from the Semeti bloodline that has connected with the become part of the Hecata with the family reunion. And the one who was Baron Semeti now goes by Doc Song. There are some members of so many that did join the ministry. You note that. Just talking about that. So, some side with, of course, the ministry, aka the former followers of Set, as they were once called. And they don't have the decomposition they used to have, which is very interesting. Probably a big change for a lot of them. There's the Gorgons. Let me change the image to Gorgons. That's the image they provide. Which are the remnants of the Lamia. It was a Cappadocia's bloodline, devout Bahiri faith, and it's assumed that it's from them, the painful kiss that they have, that the entire bloodline now originates from. So that's a very interesting fact that this one smaller bloodline that was connected, because it was a Cappadocian bloodline, an offshoot of Cappadocia, actually brings the painful kiss. It's a very cool little fact that makes them unique. They are still the warriors and guardians of the new version of Clan of Death, because that's kind of where the Lamia were for the original Cappadocians. And they still don't take lightly those who suffer the Bahiri faith or insult their martial skills. Don't mess with the Lamia. Just keep that in mind. Or the Gorgons. Of course, you have the Flesh Eaters, who are the group of Nagaraja who showed up for family reunion, seeking refugee from the 6th Great Maelstrom. So, it's honestly interesting to see that, again, some of these bloodlines have also split to a degree. They don't have Cappadocian's heritage like a lot of the other bloodlines. But they do have skill in necromancy and murder. And those that did join. So Hecata has, or Nagaraja have split. You know, that's an important thing to say. Some of these groups that have had splitting. Those that have joined with Hecata have changed. Those that did not change. So, there is these Nagaraja who no longer need to seek flesh. And that probably is very freeing from them, because it was a very powerful weakness. So, there's your Flesh Eaters. There are the Bankers of Dunsern, who are a cannibalistic banking family from Scotland that was once a branch of Clan Giovanni, that are now a bloodline in their own right. As I was talking about, some of the bloodlines of or some of the smaller family groups in Giovanni haven't found their way, but this group here became one of the major bloodlines, the main bloodlines within it. They had enough strength and power. Locating mainly in Scotland, with major holdings in the rest of the UK. They were assimilated in Giovanni in the 18th century, so it was a group that was assimilated in Giovanni. And it was... Probably there's a little bit more history to them. I'd recommend you kind of look into it yourself if you really want to, but it's the idea that when I talked about some of the family groups under the Giovanni, they would have been one that was kind of included in them. And they relished the fact they no longer have to answer to Giovanni. They're their own group within the Hecata. That's something that really, gives them some kind of thing. So, we continue talking about, of course, with the snob ones. The children of Tiknoktiklan. I might butcher that one a little bit there. These are the Psnob without their leadership of Puktuli, once driven to extinction by the Harbinger of Skulls. These were necromancers in South America, Mexico, and Hotili was their former leader. Harbingers almost brought them to extinction. Sacrificing their leader, Hotili, brought the hostilities to a close. And it's something of their skill and uniqueness that allowed them to not only be recognized within Hecata, but to be recognized very heavily within Hecata once they were brought in. So the Pisna is a very interesting group of them, the Children of Tanakh. Again, I've probably talked about some of these before, so enjoy that. The criminal Putanesca, which is a Sicilian crime family that was formerly part of Giovanni. Again, you see some of these smaller Giovanni groups being uplifted, basically. This was a group that kind of connected with the Giovanni in the 1660s. Use of them was an effort for Giovanni to compartmentalize and diverse direct connections to organized crime into a separate component. So basically, the Putanesca was kind of connected with them, but it was used to separate out their connections with actual, organized crime mafia. And once they were recognized, kind of separated on their own, because honestly, they were. They are the crime family. They are the actual mafia vampires. They get to be there on their own. The little siblings were the Rossellini. Were a rival necromantic family that became attached to Giovanni, and were known for their cruel treatment and exploitation of race. So it was a branch, technically, of the Giovanni. That, of course, we get into... they were also a Revenant family, to note, originally. So there's probably still members of them that are Revenants, who are ghouls that have bred as ghouls over many generations. Keep that in mind. And they're now a bloodline of Hecata. So they've been upgraded again. Good for them. And finally, the last of the 10 major bloodlines that are within Hecata are the Grudge Masters, or the Milners, which were a minor Giovanni family with a lot of connections to organized crime in the Americas. So it was a little different than the Putanesca, who were more European, Italian connections to crime. The Milners were kind of that American branch of everything. Sixth Great Maelstrom had enormous loss for Giovanni in general. And there were strains between the groups because of this. And you know what? It's another reason that we see that perhaps that's why the Milners were separated out into their own group, the Grudge Masters. Because of their... Honestly, Sixth Great Maelstrom caused a lot of problems to the Giovanni. I talked about that. The reason that we got to the family reunion. The Milners got a the brunt of some pushback on me. Unfortunately for them. And that's about it to talk about. And again, I've talked about how, honestly, if you want to look more into this, things like looking into the Giovanni, I've got Alani, Avilia, I've got a Cappadocians, the Harbinger of Skulls, Giovanni, Samedi, Lamia video, Nagaraja video. I think I might have a Pisnav video, and then, or at least I talk about in one of the videos. And then there's a bunch of the old smaller families that are mentioned at very least in my old Giovanni video. So I've talked about a lot of these groups before in their older histories. I'm kind of like giving this new, hey, these 10 groups here, they're now one. They were connected together, but it's an evolution to something more powerful than they ever were before. The problem is that, yeah, they're powerful. They are probably to be considered pretty dangerous. And, you know, shows off the fact that they are very much so independent. There is definitely something here that, you know, we can't honestly forget. All these groups were incredibly weak. They'd suffered so much. Sixth Great Maelstrom. Whatever you need, what do you consider for the Second Inquisition? The loss of things like their third generation, Augustus Giovanni. He might not have been an antediluvian, still third generation. Keep that in mind. He was still incredibly powerful. So much destruction was dealt on all of these groups, and the war between each other had dealt so much problems too. They all kinda hated each other to a degree and tried to murder each other a lot. And it meant devastation to a lot of their bloodlines and groups. This makes them weak, vulnerable, and honestly, this saved all of them. Becoming Hecata means that they are now not only one, not only honestly, as it goes, the Lavania's painful kiss, that's not bad. For some of the curses that some of those groups had, that's not bad. They've undone some dark curses in their bloodline. It's almost as if there's a forgiveness, and maybe that's why your Harbingers of Astra, the true remains of the Cappadocians that are part of there, are like, yeah, this was the way to do things. And it's sort of like that unification, that strength, that power, the saving of it probably also keeps a lot of the groups peaceful. And I mean, it's not like they are completely unified. We have things like a number of individuals for some of these smaller bloodlines that broke away and might be just like the old bloodlines. You could probably still find old Samedi and Nagaraja that have the statistics of old Samedi and Nagaraja. It tells you that some of them broke away. Not all of them joined this and changed. There were disagreements. So you can have individuals that are not Hecata. But Hecata is most of them now. And those remaining individuals who didn't join are even more so nearly extinct bloodlines or groups. It is much more unique and interesting, and I feel like this is where 5th edition storytelling really makes its heavyway. This is political machinations of vampires at its core, where I feel like, personally, Vampire the Masquerade does best, and that's why I really do enjoy their existence and their creation, and I did want to talk about it today. Anyway, I said a lot of my piece on my personal feelings for some of this stuff. Each your own. If you love 5th edition, if you love a lot of decisions they've made, I have nothing against that. You know, it's just not my style of story. And though, I can definitely use this as an example of I can like some stuff 5th edition. I can pick this up and show it to you and say, like, this is really cool. This is really neat. This is great. And this, honestly, I feel like, tells a really good story. And I think that's where vampire lore, no matter what it comes from, what edition or whatever, is at its best when it tells a good story. And these bloodlines and clans, another reason I've done all these videos is they do tell stories. They introduce types of characters. They give reasoning and explanation on why a vampire might be away, and give unique ways to roleplay those vampires. I hope you enjoyed today. I think I'll leave it there. I think I could dive into this a little bit more, but I think this expresses all my feelings and shares with you all the information you need to know about Clan Hecata. Hecata. Hecata? Hecata? I'm actually not sure how that way is pronounced. I think I tried to do it one way, but I think it's Hecata. Is it proper? Maybe? I'm bad at pronouncing things. Sorry about that. Anyway, if you joined me live on Twitch, hey, thanks, great. I'm interested in what people's thoughts are. In this case, my questions are, have you played Hecata before? Which means, have you played then, in this case, 5th edition? And if you're a new player, what's your thoughts on it in comparison to what you've heard about older ones? Or if you're an older player who came from, D20, older editions into 5th edition, what's your kind of opinion? I'm curious. I don't ask that question a lot, so we'll kind of leave that as today's question. Following on Twitch is a great way of giving support. Subscription on YouTube, liking the video there, leaving a comment as it comments, ring the bell if you've already subscribed. All these are great ways of supporting the channel. I have a social media for Discord, twitter.com. Those links are down below. Those places that I give generally my schedule, updates, small updates, and some thought patterns. And Twitter, I occasionally put up like random pictures or stuff. I try to, if I get an interesting picture of something, I try to put it up there. The world and nature for me. We wanted to see more tabletop stuff. Saturday mornings, usually around 11 o'clock. That's when I do my World of Darkness stuff, like Vampire. Most of the time. Not always. Other of our tabletop stuff, Tuesdays, Thursdays, usually early afternoon, around 1 o'clock, 1 to 2, give or take, depending on what's going on in life. Tuesdays usually is a variety. Thursdays is usually Pathfinder-related stuff. Pathfinder / their World of Olirant. I do gaming streams on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. If you ever want to check those out. I do live shows of tabletop games. Long hours for this Spooktober. And this was a good topic for Spooktober. Maybe I didn't say that at the beginning. We're on October Spooktober. And discuss tabletop every Saturday at 6 p.m. Alright. I think I've shouted out all my schedules, my information. You want to see me. It's two different channels. Look, everybody. I hope you enjoyed learning about Hecata. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right whenever I say it. I'll see you all next time. See you in the future. And until that time where I show up and talk about more vampire or other World of Darkness stuff, hey, maybe I'll finally have that update video on all the bloodlines and clans and stuff like that if I can put it together. Figure out an easy way to do it all. Where that would be. Until the next time, though, I bid you all farewell.